views are those of the host and not those of Clear Channel Broadcasting licenses. Welcome to CareGiver Reality with your host, David Levy. David Levy brings more than 25 years of practical experience helping thousands of family caregivers find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse, a parent, or a loved one who is no longer able to care for him or herself, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, today's edition of CareGiver Reality and your host, David Levy.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. This is the CareGiver Reality Show. I'm your host, David Levy, gerontologist. I'm here with my co-host, Paul, an educator, a very learned man, a caregiver like myself. And we're here to bring you the latest spin on what's happening out there in the world of family caregiving, the informal family caregiver. All 50 to 60 million of you, unpaid, working in the trenches every day, trying to keep a job, trying to raise your kids, trying to take care of mom or grandma or a spouse. You guys are just to be commended because it's a very, very tough job. And as I've said many times, the formal healthcare system has really shoved a lot onto the informal family caregiver system, without any aspect of training, education, awareness, better resources. If it isn't happening directly on their clinical watch, you figure it out. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, 50 million or 60 million people reinventing the wheel every day is not very efficient. So one of the things that we do, Paul and I, to some little degree, tell you a little bit about when we're doing caregiving for our spouses, a little bit of what we did. But we're not about what we did. We're about what you need to know. And there's a very, very big difference. Learning something and having somebody tell you what they did are two entirely different things. Because the one thing that we repeat to you constantly out there is if you've seen one case of caregiving, you've seen one case of caregiving. And even if you're the caregiver and you did it for your sister with MS, you did it for your mother with dementia, you did it because dad had a stroke, grandpa was frail, a frail elder. Each one was different. Your relationship, your role, your age, the geography, the finances, what you were allowed in to do and not. In this day and age, we still have a whole generation of people that came out of the Depression who, I don't care how sick they are, I hear it every day, they wouldn't let their children or anybody else know where they have a penny, who it's being left to, and you tell them we need these documents. And, we talk about it all the time, durable powers of attorney to be able to guide the financial ship and healthcare advance directives to be able to step in and say something about healthcare. And as late as today, I had a client call me, and she said to me, my mother, who's now 92, says she has a will, and everything that needs to be done is in there. She said to me also, I've never seen the will. And I reminded her that mom's still alive. So whatever's in that will is not going to guide the ship right now. And the other comment that she made was, even though her doctors told her she needed to do this, especially the advanced directives, when she was in the hospital 6 months ago with a similar incident to what has her back in there now, she made the comment to her daughter afterwards, well, I got in and out of the hospital without you having to interfere with my health care. And so there's a big attitude out there amongst certain generations about whether they're even going to let you be a part of caregiving and whether or not they even know, all right, that they need it themselves. Paul, good evening. You're looking very dapper tonight.
Oh, thank you, David. It's always a pleasure to be here with you, sharing some ideas and helping our caregivers find a little bit of sunshine in their day. As you were talking about the advanced directives, with Mom and the 92-year-olds, I was thinking about a recent conversation I had with a mom getting ready to send daughter off to school, college, not recognizing that reaching the age of majority, she needed those advance directives, those powers of attorney, just as much as the mother did. And there was never a thought to get them done before she went to school. Too many cases we've seen incidents develop, problems arise, and help not being able to be delivered.
Right. And that's so important. We forget that once you've reached your majority, once you're 21 or 18, depends on what state you're in, not to have those documents mean that your parents, even your husband, you could be 21 and married, your husband cannot intervene in your health care except if it happens as an accommodation. And if it happens away from home and you don't know anybody and you can't call your local doctor, and you, even if you have one in this day and age of so much managed care, you can't call them and say, hey, give me a heads up. What's really happening? Nobody wants to talk to me. I mean, they talked to me a little bit in the ER, but now that my wife's up on the floor, I don't know what's happening, and I can't get an answer, and she's in no condition to tell me.
And you can't make decisions in a timely manner if you don't have the information.
Right.
Lacking those documents, you're blind.
And so when we say that everybody needs to have them, we're not kidding. You know, when you're a child, there are certain parental responsibilities that go with raising a child and having somebody who's a minor. But even when minors get caught up in difficult health care and other complications, they many times need a guardian or special needs protection over and above what their parents may be able to do and guide them with. And there's a big difference between maternal, paternal instinct and caregiving. And one is not the other. And for parents that have special needs children, that's a big eye-opener. And you realize that your child has something wrong, and you're going to be the very best mother. But when you recognize that it may be a chronic situation, and you're going to be doing this for a long time, making that switch from mom to caregiver and back to mom,
Very hard.
very, very hard to do. And you and I have been discussing this at some great length. You know, one of the things that we want to tell our audience is we speak often about the elderly, those over 65. I'm over 65. I really don't view myself as elderly.
There are mornings I do.
All right, well, you know, Maudie Frickert, as Jonathan Winters used to say. But the point remains is there are just as many caregivers who are 50 to 60 and care recipients, 40 to 50, and care recipients in that same age bracket. And we can't forget that. There is no classic stereotype. There's no classic model for caregiving, except for the fact that you have stepped into a role, irrespective of whether you're a relationship, a significant other, a good friend, whatever it may happen to be. You've stepped into the role of assuming certain care and protection for somebody who can no longer do it for themselves. And that's a caregiver. That's the whole switch. And believe me, if you do not know what you are stepping into, then you are destined to become mired in the quicksand that is caregiving. And I'm not trying to be sensationalistic or to be gloom and doom, but caregiving is a long-term effort, especially when somebody has a chronic illness that the medical profession has managed to keep them going, even though in an earlier time they might have passed by now. The effort that you have to put in, as well as lead your own life, is very tough. And we forget, I mean, we're here in South Florida, but for our audience out there around the world and around the United States, Canada, whatever it may be, we recognize, and we will be discussing further, the fact that most people live in rural areas and not big urban areas, and they don't have the kind of resources that we see down here. And we have to be very careful at times when we get into talking about what's available, that we uniquely live in one of the 4 or 5 areas of the country that has an abundance of nursing homes, assisted living facilities, independent living, dementia facilities, and a whole host of hospitals. When you get out into rural Idaho, and all you have is maybe a hospital 100 miles away, 2 churches, and a Walmart, and I'm not being cliche, but I mean many towns are constructed almost just like that, then finding resources and understanding what you need to do is a lot more difficult. I'll never forget, Paul, and then we'll break into a different discussion. I was part of handling what they call a carve-out group, a specialty group of frail elders that were under a Medicaid program about 5 or 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the group I had was split between people in Tennessee and people in Texas. One night, I was speaking to a woman who was a caregiver for her husband. Husband had dementia. He also had some other issues. He'd slipped and fallen. And I said, "You sound pretty calm tonight." And she says, "Well, I'm sitting here in my rocking chair and I'm reading my good book." And I said, "Bible's very comforting, isn't it?" She said, "Yes, it is, but I'm having a problem." And I said, "What's that?" "There's no chapter on caregiving." And I never forgot that. And, you know, we forget that, you know, there's a lot of comfort in religion, there's a lot of comfort in things, but there's very little comfort in being faced with caregiving and not knowing what to do.
And also, David, making assumptions of what will or will not be available at the moment. Good neighbors help one another, but to rely on a good neighbor for this long-term caregiving is really quite an assumption and a leap of faith. When we move out into the hitherlands, good neighbors do help out one another, but there's limitations as to what they can do. More and more, I think the responsibility is going to fall upon the churches and schools, other community type of organizations that can step in to help avoid, and it's going to have to be more grassroots than top down from government.
Well, I agree. You know, the government can provide acute care and is going through the machinations right now with affordable care, managed care, etc., to try and get everybody at least to be able to have access to a doctor. And that's very important.
Sure.
But it's just as important when you're faced with caregiving to have access to a competent authority, somebody that can say to you, "I understand what you're going through. I may not have done the exact same thing that you are facing, but there are things about caregiving and stress and burnout and how you control aspects of your own life in order to be able to endure." And I say endure because it's an endurance contest. And love is a great motivator, but very rarely will love carry you over the finish line when you have been beaten up by the system, rejected by the institutions you thought were going to stand by you, and find that both friends and neighbors, well-meaning as they are tied up with their own stuff or have heard just about all they can hear about what's going on with you and your husband, and really they see it coming, or possibly they don't, but they just don't want to listen anymore. And when you get down to a younger age category, they're infallible. Nothing is going to happen to them.
Total denial.
Yep. I have a neighbor. He's 19 years old, and I hadn't seen him around for the last few days, and I said to his mother when I saw her outside today, I said, you know, we'll call him Johnny. "Where's Johnny?" And she said his best friend was killed in a motorcycle accident about 7 days ago, and he can't wrap his head around it. He can't believe he's gone. He's 19 years old. This is the first person that he's been close to, other than like his grandmother, that he'd ever seen die. And here was somebody who was a peer. They went motorcycle racing together. They hung out. And so the point remains is, yes, he's going through the grieving process, but the real story is there's a 19-year-old that never expected to be dead today, who was on a ventilator for 5 or 6 days until they had to pull it, all right, and then he passed. But the reminder is, I don't care how old or how young you are, we're all susceptible to that next event.
On any given day of the week.
Any given day.
And we're seeing that on television in terms of the military and our men and women coming back from battle who carry not only loss of limbs and traumatic brain injury, post-trauma stress disorder, and a host of other things. We're seeing it being manifest in younger people, and we have difficulty in getting our arms around that. What do we do? How do we help these people?
Well, that's a problem that the VA is trying to face right now. They pretty much got acute medicine down, but they are being so overwhelmed with how are they going to handle the families of wounded warriors. We forget. We were in Iraq, we were in Afghanistan, we were in Desert Storm. We still have a residual of long neglected Vietnam War victims that have been living by the side of the road or whatever. And I don't mean that to cast aspersion, but for some reason they got caught on the wrong side of patriotism at a time in our history.
An unpopular war?
An unpopular war. Well, I don't think the wars that we have going on today are any more popular, but I think that we have a much deeper recognition because we don't have the draft, which sent everybody off to war in Vietnam. Right now, you have people that are raising their hand and signing up to go. And so when they're wounded, when they're injured, when they're killed, we feel it. We feel it deeply because they made a conscious choice to go out and do that to protect our interests without getting into the political reasons of why. But right now, there are a huge amount of women, 22 to 35, who are facing long-term caregiving with spouses that they know between traumatic injury, limb injury. It's wonderful to see these guys and women, that get up with an artificial limb and run around the track. But for every one of those, there are two that can't. And that's a constancy of predicament that families have. And by the same token, they got a 2 and a 5-year-old, a 6 and a 9-year-old, who doesn't have the daddy that went off to war, all right? And mommy now can't devote all the time to them that she'd like to be able to because of the tremendous demands. And nobody is teaching them caregiving. The kind of caregiving that we talk about, non-clinical. Of course, they're showing them how to change wound care and how to use a Hoyer lift to get in and out of bed or things like that. But they're not teaching them how to put the emotional underpinnings in place to be able to endure what may be a lifetime's worth of care that they're going to have to devote to their loved one, their spouse, whoever it may be, a brother who came back and a sister who feels that she's got to stop what she's doing to take care of him, or a brother that feels the same way about his sister. And we are very, very far behind in this country in recognizing what to do about informal family caregiving. I'm not saying that the rest of the world has any more insight into family caregiving, but there's a greater recognition in countries that do have a more socialized set of medicine, like England and France, etc., that the family has an integral part to play in care. Whether you're in the hospital and they expect you to bring the food up or make the bed or whatever it is, families involved. We seem to have a system where family doesn't get involved until the clinical system is over, and then tag, you're it. And that's a tough place to be.
And it's based upon assumptions that have little validity to the real world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've said so many times, it's not intuitive, it's not taught, there is not a caregiver
Gene.
and it's not a disease.
No, it
So
isn't. It's a
you're-
role.
It's a role, and you're in a set of circumstances for which you've had no training and are probably ill-prepared to make all of the changes to your life and the associative people in your life for this new responsibility that you didn't necessarily ask for.
Right. Well, I'm going to just say it once. One of the things we talk about, and folks, I must tell you, we finally got through the last pages of turning the Family Caregiver Practical Problem Solving Manual to make it Kindle ready. And so I'm hoping within the next 3 to 4 weeks it'll be out there and available. It has to go through Amazon's scrutiny, but it was good enough for the Florida Council on Aging, and it's been tried and true over the last few years. People come back and say, I don't know what I would have done without it, because we don't tell you what to do. We show you how to approach things and how to think about it. How do you make a plan? And you can't get too granular in that plan. You can't get down too deep in the grass, because caregiving constantly changes, and not everything that we could say or talk about here is available just as we're talking now in rural areas, in areas that don't have well-structured area agencies on aging and a lot of facilities around that can help augment and make a difference in people's lives.
And there are a lot of people who really don't have the financial resources to afford to bring these services into their home, and they're relying upon agencies, they're relying upon family members, they're relying upon a lot of institutions that really aren't equipped to provide not only the services, but more importantly, the education and the support to help these people. Where do they go?
I don't know. It reminds me very much of when you see the picture of the Spirit of 76, and one guy's on a crutch and another one's got a bandage around his head, and they're a ragtag army that had defended this country against the British, but they were very unprepared for what they had to do. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of caregivers, and that picture is emblematic of what people have to do to be in the fight that really don't understand what the fight truly entails. We're coming up on a break, and so when we come back, Paul and I are going to let you into some insights on what has gone on this past week in our spousal family caregiving, and we've got some other things to share with you. So I hope you'll be back after the break, and if you want to talk to us, we're at 1-800-889-0267 or 561-844-6167. And we'd love to hear from you, even though I know you're fascinated with listening to us. Take it away.
Hey now, this is Alan Elkins, along with my partner Richard Friedman, two practicing attorneys who, unlike many of our colleagues, have a sense of humor. We have a show, the Elkins and Friedman Know Nothing Show. It's on every Friday night from 7 to 8 p.m. on AM 1230 WBZT. Fridays are a time to relax and kick back, and I promise we won't bore you with political talk or serious subjects. If you like to hear weird stories about people doing gross things and behaving badly, then we're your guys. You won't regret it. Richard, you have anything to say?
Yes.
Thank you, Richard.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for him or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you feeling burned out, stressed, frustrated, and you just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, you've tried lawyers and mental health professionals, but now realize they don't have realistic, practical answers. What you need is an expert, non-clinical family caregiver, one with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself, one who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. His name is David Levy, and you can reach him at dlevy@caregivered.org. Caregiver ED is one word, or call direct to 561-482-0086. That's 561-482-0086. This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy. You can call in to speak with David on air, toll free at 1-800-889-0267. That's 1-800-889-0267. Again, here's David Levy and more of today's Caregiver Reality.
We're back, and I want to let anybody that's listening on the radio to know that you can catch us on caregiverreality.com. Just click on live show. This one's being simulcast at the same time. However, it will also be posted along with the archive of probably the last dozen shows. So you can see what we've done. You can see what we were talking about and where we're headed. And very soon, what we'd like to do is also bring up here, because sometimes phone calling, people don't want to get on the phone, but we're going to start bringing up our chat line from the website so that you can dial in, or rather tune in, and ask the questions that you want to ask. That's caregiverreality.com, live show. And if you do want to call, it's 800-889-0267. And we're also available on iHeartRadio.com. Go to Florida and click on WBZT.
And AMP2.
And AMP2 TV. And God only knows, very respectfully, where else our producer Freddie puts the show. All right? So for those of you that might be watching us from a strange place, it isn't because I understood it. It's because Freddie said it needed to be there.
David, if I may.
Yes.
You have shared with me that your lovely bride, Suzette, is going to be going in for some surgery in a couple of weeks for, I guess, a knee replacement.
Yes.
Now, I know how busy you are, and I know all that you do with the private clients that you're working with on a regular basis, all of the support groups, the writings that you do. How are you getting ready for what is about to come, and particularly when she's about to come home?
Right. Well, that's a good question, and I'm no different than anybody else. I have been working on my plan. I've been strategizing on paper what I think is needed, what may be necessary, what happens if all of a sudden in the middle, I'm back tonight and I'm very pleased. But if you saw what I looked like last Wednesday after 2 dental bone transplants and 3 implants in my upper jaw, I was in no condition to do anything.
Right.
And actually, for the last 4 or 5 days, I've relied upon my daughter, my daughter-in-law, and a few others to kind of, fill the gap while I just complained. But I'm laying out a strategy. I know that one of the days she's in the hospital, I have to be out of town. I have already arranged with daughters and family to cover that gap. I have deliberately, she'll be going in on a Tuesday. They want her in the day before. The surgery is on a Wednesday, and they indicate to me they'll be out on Friday. And I have to be out of town on Thursday, so I'll be back. And if somebody needs to pick her up to bring her home, we'll certainly cover that. But Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and I've cleared Tuesday up until when we have to do the radio show for me to be around. And then I will call in other troops. If need be, I have some very good friends, as you well know, that have home health care agencies. And to the extent that it may be necessary to supplement what we can do, we'll do that. I'm very concerned because of her underlying condition. Obviously, we can't use any form of anesthesia. And so this is all going to be with either a spinal block and a pain block, etc. But unfortunately, her condition is such that she doesn't tolerate narcotics well either. And she can sometimes have some real difficulty. I've been able to get the drug that allows her, when she has these spasms due to narcotics, to let up, because it's right in her sphincter in the middle of her abdomen. And the other day she was talking to her surgeon, and he had the anesthesiologist in there because he wanted to discuss with her. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, what happens when you have a problem? And he said, well, my husband gives me a shot. And he said, of what? And she said, anapsine, which is what this drug is. Anapsine? Only anesthesiologists are allowed to give that, and only very carefully. Well, I must tell you, over the last 20 years that we've been married, I have probably given her upwards of 40 shots on 40 different occasions without, I think, imperiling her life. And while I certainly respect what anesthesiologists do and their expertise, you do what you have to do. It's part of being a family caregiver.
Now, let's go a little step further, because I know with myself and my caregiving, objectivity oftentimes go out the window when you're working with someone who you love. How are you feeling about all of this? I mean, you got to have a lot of trepidation.
I do have trepidation. You know, the few times that we've had to do surgery where there wasn't a choice in the matter, I was very fearful. And one of the times when she had surgery, she got MRSA, you know, which is the methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. For those of you out there, it's a pretty nasty infection. It typically is picked up in hospitals and institutions. And so following that, she had to have 45 days of infusion therapy. And that also knocked her off.
Which means what?
Which means she was going to an infectious disease doctor's office every day for 45 to an hour's worth of infusion therapy with a drug called vancomycin, which is just about the top of the spectrum.
So they had an IV line?
You're right. She had a permanent, well, she had an IV line in for the whole time that she was getting this, so they didn't have to keep resetting it. But I never know with her what complications are going to arise. So even though I try and plan for the unplanned and expect the unexpected, I don't know what it'll be. As you know, lately I've been talking to you and getting your perspective on things, because you know, when it comes to caregiving, you and I are homies, and I always benefit from your perspective and your wisdom. And I don't care how much you know, when it's happening to you and the complications and the situations are difficult, you really have to lay it out. So I have not a spreadsheet, but I have an item-by-item checklist.
Go-to list.
A go-to list, and who's a backup just in case somebody can't be there. And I've alerted, as I said, a couple of my friends that have home care that I may need them on a very short notice. But it's not easy. And right up until, you know, I take her on that Tuesday, I'll be in here to do the radio show. And, I mean, I have responsibilities. Every caregiver has responsibilities. And I've been trying, notwithstanding, you know, everything that's gone on in the last 5 or 6 months to me, I've tried to stay on my diet. I've tried to stay on my exercise regimen. I've tried to keep myself in the best shape that I can, because this is not a sprint. This is a long-distance run. This is the 10,000-meter skate today. And, you know, when they lay it all out and it's 6 miles, that's what caregiving is. It's 6 miles on skates. Paul, how are you doing with your caregiving?
Well, we're still working. I mentioned last week that Debbie had a fall.
Right.
And with her condition, a fall is particularly dangerous because of the damage that she had a while back ago with her neck, and it was very high up near the brainstem. So it affects pain levels, it affects some cognitive abilities, radiating pain down, and it would come and go. And I guess the way that we communicate to one another, what do your numbers look like today?
Oh, that's right. You do the pain numbers, don't you?
We do the pain numbers.
Right, with the smiley and the sad faces.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean,
but it works.
And we have a regimen that was laid out by her doctors. If her pain levels are low, these are the medications you should take. But when the pain levels are higher, there are medication that needs to be taken that she's very resistant in taking them because she doesn't like the effects of them.
Well, I can certainly understand that. I found that with this dental stuff, that what they wanted to give me was almost worse than what I was suffering from, because I don't tolerate, strong painkillers as well, so I can appreciate that.
And then it's the ups and downs,
Of life and every day anyhow.
It is, but I guess what is very frustrating for Debbie, that's passed on through me, is that 5 bad days in bed, headaches, not feeling so well, finally feel a little bit better today, and is now upset that I've lost 5 days of my life and I want to make those 5 days up in the next 24 hours.
Well, I certainly understand that, because my wife is the Energizer Bunny, and she can be knocked out of commission for 4 or 5 days, and then, every tile has to be cleaned.
And the price gets paid.
Yes, it does, because you can't. 4 or 5 days down is so deconditioning to your muscles, to the tone, to your vascular system, to, your breathing. All of the things that we do in a normal day that keeps us in decent shape knock us on our backsides when we're on our backsides. Paul, the other day, actually it was last week, just before I had to go to the dentist, I had a phone call from one of my caregiver daughters. Mm-hmm. Okay, and her mother has dementia, and she came to me and said, I have 3 sisters, and we're all in our late 30s, early 40s. What does the fact that mom has dementia mean to us? Well, as I said, I'm not a neurologist, but I certainly spend enough time with this stuff. And this past week, the journal called Neurology published a very, very interesting study. And they took 4 groups of people. Ones that had no parents that had dementia. They had the sons whose fathers had late onset dementia. They had daughters whose mothers got it in their 60s, and then they had a control group of folks that didn't have anything. And there have been recent studies that have indicated that there are certain genetic lines that travel in certain ways. And this tended to prove out what some of the earlier research is showing, that a daughter who has a mother that has dementia has a much higher potential to get dementia than a son who has a father that had late onset dementia, or somebody that didn't have it at all. But the most dangerous combination is if both parents had dementia. That showed almost, without a doubt, it was 6 or 7 times higher than any of the other things. It showed all of the contraction of the brain, the plaquing, the amyloid. So I'm not here to scare people, but I'm here to tell you that if both of your parents had dementia, there's a pretty good likelihood that you may. Next on that list would be a daughter-mother combination, and then a son-father. And in this day and age, if we're going to stop or slow down Alzheimer's, it's going to be because those 40-year-olds who have a genetic predisposition to getting Alzheimer's are going to have to raise their hand and say, all right, test me. I need to know from my biomarkers what's in my spinal fluid, what's in my blood, whether I have the potential for this, because we're starting to see and understand that the drugs that kind of didn't make it in this last couple of years was because dementia was so far along when we finally saw it, there was no way to turn around the speeding freight train. But if we can catch it when somebody's in their 40s, all right, and slow it down, even if we can't stop it, all right, but if you can get 8 more good years between 65 and 73 or 74 without getting dementia, even though you're predisposed to it, that will be a real gift. And that's going to be the next area when it comes to dementia that we're going to have to really spearhead. In the meantime, what all of the wise heads out there in neurology and that study dementias are saying. In the meantime, the only thing that we can do, eat right, exercise, stimulate our brains, stay socially interactive. Can't tell you how important it is to stay engaged. And that's so important even when you have a loved one that has dementia. They need stimulation. They need to be around other people. They need to do things. When I go into the dementia facilities that I do support groups for, I see incredible paintings on the wall. They may not mean anything. They're finger paintings. They're vivid. They're vibrant. And these are what dementia patients are doing to express themselves. Music brings out a whole different aspect of their personalities. But being involved with others where nobody is pointing a finger at you, nobody is judgmental, is so important. And for those of you that have a loved one at home, I have to tell you that just sitting and watching TV, no matter how interesting it is and no matter what it may remind everybody of,
Doesn't cut it.
It doesn't cut it. You need to be able, if you have one, to get out to a senior center, be involved with others that may have dementia, regardless of what kind, so that you can keep them stimulated. There is somebody still home inside of that body. They may not be able to deal with you cognitively, remembering and replying and doing things, but there's somebody in there who hears, who smells, who tastes, who feels, who has emotions, and they're entitled to the dignity of who they are as a person, even if they can't communicate with you.
Oh, absolutely.
And so quality of life, independence, to the extent that socializing and some of these other things allow it to happen, are critical elements. And for those of you out there that don't live in an area that has a support group or has others that have similar afflictions, you're going to have to make a little extra effort to see who does or how far you're going to have to travel, even if it's only once or twice a month. Maybe there's a hospital, maybe there's a clinic, maybe there's a Walmart that'll lend a room where a support group can be conducted, where people can come and share their problems, as well as trying to find things for our loved ones that are afflicted with these diseases.
David, to go back to that report for a second, just so that we're very clear in what we're saying, we are not saying that if those situations with mother and father, that we're not saying that that's a guarantee that's going to be your future.
No, but compared to those that had no parents with it, it's 6 times higher. And compared
it's a likelihood.
It's a very strong likelihood. A little bit less with mother and daughter, and a little bit less with father and son. But if you've got both parents with it, you really need to give some very serious thought to trying to get yourself to an institution or wherever they're doing some of this genetic testing and find out exactly what may be going on with you so that you can try and step in and do whatever else you can do to help yourself. And remember, when we do human testing, it requires humans. We can't just keep giving this stuff to mice and glowworms and other, creatures that are great in terms of lab study, but are never going to cut it in finding out whether or not these things work on humans.
The other takeaway is that if you are in those higher risk groups, it is imperative that you start a care plan that if this should manifest, what are we going to do?
Right.
Who are going to be the players? How is this going to unfold?
What's going to fund it?
What's going to fund it?
I read a very scary news article today. One of the big long-term care companies, I won't mention who because we're not here to do bashing, had a client, a husband and a wife who were paying, $400 or $500 a month to have long-term care. and mom got sick and dad couldn't handle it, and the son, who had been on the policy in terms of an extra person to advise if something went wrong, called the company to activate the policy and was told, we canceled you out 10 months ago for failure to pay your premium. He said, I was on the list to be informed. I wasn't informed. They said, yes, you were. We see your name here on the list. Well, he turned around and said to him, did you send it registered, certified? No, we drop it in the mail. All right, and this is something that we all have to realize. Mom and dad may have a long-term care policy, but if they're starting to get frail and you're not on top of what's coming in and out of that mail, all they have to do is forget a check or two, a month or two in a row, and they get canceled out, and they don't even know that they were canceled, and yet you paid premiums for 8, 9, 10, 11 years, whatever it may be, and when you need it, it's not there, simply because you were not capable enough to recognize. And that's exactly what these policies are all about. When you're not capable, they're supposed to step in and not get down to the fact that they didn't send, Ed McMahon and the magazine crew out to your front door to say, did you pay your premium today? Right. But I do think that they have an affirmative obligation to notify you in a way that is substantially different than just one more piece of correspondence that you may or may not open, think it's an insurance ad. They have a responsibility to make it a registered letter or send it to your FedEx. Every businessman alerts every other businessman what goes on by doing that. Why shouldn't something as important as your insurance policy be left to elderly that may not be able to care for themselves to take care of that? I think it's unconscionable.
It is, and I guess one of the questions out there is this a one-off, or is this more what's going on than not?
I think this is part of a trend. I think that the insurance companies are playing the game to the letter of the law. One of the things that we've seen lately is the fact that many people that are in managed care plans, I'm not even talking about affordable care. I read the story the other day. There was one person, he had cancer and was being treated by an oncologist that had been treating him for X period of time. He went to go to see him, and the doctor said, I can't see you. And he said, why? I was dropped from the panel. Just like that. They just decided one day that he was too expensive, they had one too many, and here was a patient, all right, with a life-threatening illness, who couldn't get back to the doctor that was treating him because somebody decided in corporate somewhere to shut down certain people, providers, facilities in that panel area. And I think we're going to see more and more of that because costs are going up. Insurance companies still have a bottom line. They have shareholders as well as patients. And I think that if you want the benefit of the doubt for yourself and for others, you better be a damn good advocate and not take no for an answer. Take those appeals, argue about it, make a point, go to the newspaper, bring it to our attention. Whatever it takes, you shouldn't be victimized by something that you were relying upon due to an error that happened simply because somebody wasn't capable enough to realize they were canceling insurance.
And I think tying the beginning of the show to where we are right now, there's so much stress, there's so much knowledge, there's so much activities that are involved in family caregiving. But perhaps the most important part of that is this advocacy, that beyond what you're doing for the one that you love and the stresses that you feel, you have to be that advocate against a system that is set up to make things difficult.
Well, if you write a business plan with goals and objectives, you know at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whether or not you're meeting those objectives, whether sales are doing what this outcomes. Mm-hmm. All right. When you create a caregiver plan and you understand the way things are going to probably go down in the next 30, 60, 90 days. Are you meeting those goals? Did you get those things done? Is it happening? Then at least you have some benchmarks. All of a sudden, when you see a big red light, a big blip, that what you had planned to happen isn't there, you need to find out why. And it was something that you missed, then shame on you. You get back and take care of it. If it's the system pushing back on you, that's when you got to play Spirit of 76, put your bandage around your head and your crutch, and you walk right into wherever that problem is happening, and you tell them, I want to understand why this is going on. I want to talk to the highest level that water flows to in this place, or whatever the circumstances may be, and I will not accept no for an answer. And if you don't want the press and the newspaper and everybody else here, then work with me. I mean, you got to be a squeaky wheel, but you can't be a pain in the ass.
Well, you know, David, personal experience in dealing with trying to get my own prescription plan straightened out.
Oh, gosh.
It is virtually impossible to talk to a human being.
Right.
It's a series,
automated,
it's
whatever.
all automated, and I've been doing this for a lot of years.
Right.
I've been an advocate for a lot of years. I think I have the semblance of intelligence to do it, and I was pulling my hair out.
Well, you had the Plan D from hell.
I sure did. But the reality is that when we're talking about some of our older citizens who are struggling not only with their own issues but caring for someone else, it is so hard. 30 minutes to wait on the phone to get only hung up on at that point. The frustration is overwhelming.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's not going to get better until it gets worse. And folks, you're listening to the Caregiver Reality Show, caregiverreality.com. We're coming to you on WBZT 1230 AM. And I want you to know that going forward, you will hear on this show many of the things that we talk about each and every time, of things that you need to know, how to plan, what's going wrong, why you need to be so careful. Get yourself on that mailing list if your parents have long-term care, so that you know whether or not. And if you have to, tell them, I'll send you $5. Send it to me FedEx. Do what you have to do so the things that you're depending on don't fall out of bed.
Talk a little bit about caregiverreality.com and the resource that it is.
Well, it's a great resource, but we've run out of time. Somehow or other, it gets to be the end of that hour, Paul. And I want to thank Florida, South Florida, America, and the world for listening in. You can catch us on our website. You'll be able to see us on all the things that Freddie sticks us on. And we'll be back next Tuesday. And any of you in the meantime, go to the chat or send us an email at info@caregiverreality.com.
Be well, everyone.
Yep. And have a good evening and success at caregiving.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist with over 25 years of experience providing practical, realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one unable to care for him or herself. To reach David Levy online, go to info@caregiverreality.com. See you next week on Caregiver Reality.